So the next video in this series is going to be on the quadratic formula. We're going to derive the formula, and then we're going to use the formula to solve problems, and then if you're really lucky, I will sing the formula to the theme from Pop Goes the Weasel. Okay, you'll see here that the quadratic formula is going to come about through solving using the standard form of a quadratic equation. All right, so if you'll see so far, I've got ax squared plus bx plus c equals 0. And then I have moved the c to the other side by subtracting the c, and then dividing all the way through by a. And you might recognize that these are the first two steps that you would use to complete the square, except that we're going to use the letters instead of numbers. All right, so after that, you're going to have x squared plus b over ax equals negative c over a. All right, so we are going to complete the square. So let me go ahead and write it like this. And I'm going to take, this will be x plus, I'm going to take half of ba. So I'm going to have b over 2a, and then I'm going to square it, plus b squared over 4a squared. And since I add it there, I've got to add it over here, b squared over 4a squared. Okay? So that's going to be all of this. So I have, if I get a common denominator, I have negative c times 4a over a squared and 4 b squared over 4a squared, and then subtract. Okay, so I've got all of this. So now the point of here is to take the square root of both sides. Okay, and so that's going to yield x plus b over 2a equals the square root of, plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over 4a squared. All right, and then I'm going to subtract that to the other side. So that equals negative b over 2a plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac over, and then I can take the square root of 4a squared, that's just going to be 2a. So if you combine it all into one, the quadratic formula looks like this. Negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. And where do you get a, b, and c? Up here in the standard form of a quadratic equation. Now this is pretty, I'm not going to require you to do this ever, but I wanted you to see, bottom line, that if you start with the standard form, all you're doing is rearranging it into a formula so that it's x equals. In other words, you're solving for x. And that's where they get the quadratic formula. Okay, so let's use it. All right, so I have a is 2, b is 3, and c is negative 3. All right, and so once again, x equals negative b plus or minus the square root b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. Okay, so let's write it out. So negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared is 9, minus 4, a times c is negative 6, and this is all over 2 times 2, which is a. All right, so what I do to save a little bit of time is I just work inside underneath here and then just write it above. It'll still be the square root, but at least, you know, you can just write it. So I've got negative 24, so I've got 9 plus 24, which is what? 33? Okay, I'm glad you know that. So this is negative 3 plus or minus the square root of 33 all over 4. Well, the factors of 33 are 3 and 11, and neither one of those is a perfect square. So we're just going to leave it like that. So x equals, and if you'll notice, how many answers are there? Plus or minus. So if I were going to write these separately, I would say negative 3 plus the square root of 33 divided by 4. And then the other one is negative 3 minus the square root of 33 over 4. And those are decimal numbers. These are real, but they'll be decimal numbers. They won't be whole numbers. So there are two real solutions. Notice that underneath the radical, that's a positive number. Okay? Okay, so it doesn't even matter. You can use the quadratic formula and you can also complete the square and solve any quadratic equation, even non-real solutions. Now, this one right here looks like it's going to be some big numbers. So A is 10, B is negative 21, and C is 55. All right, so I have x equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4 times AC all over 2a. All right, yuck, yuck, yuck. 21 times 21 is 441. So I have 441 minus, and what's 550 times 4? 0, 0, 2200. So 2200, 441, that's going to be 9, 5, 17, 59. Right? So x is equal to 21 plus or minus the square root of 17, negative 1759 over 20. Right? Well, negative, if it's negative, right, underneath the radical, negative, then it's not going to be a real solution. So this is 21 plus or minus I, square root of 1759 over 20. So if you'll notice, if under the radical is negative, you're going to have two non-real solutions. Okay, let's do a quick recap here about ways to solve quadratic equations. So let's do a recap. So the first way that we looked at was we used graphing. Okay, and when you use graphing, you see where the x-intercepts are. That would be a solution, x-intercepts, right? If you use a calculator, you can use that to find, that's also considered graphing. Okay, on the second method that we used was all kinds of factoring. Okay, graphing works wonderfully as long as it crosses or bounces onto the x-axis. If it doesn't do either one of those, if it's not a real solution, then you can't use graphing. Okay, factoring works lovely as long as these are on, the roots are on as long as the roots are whole numbers, right? So factoring doesn't always work. It does not always work. The third method that we used was completing the square. Completing the square. Now, that always works. It's just tedious. It always works. Okay? So this one, these don't always work. They don't work for non-real solutions. Okay? Completing the square always works. And then the fourth way that we found was the quadratic formula. and it always works. It works for real and non-real solutions. Okay? So, and as promised, here is the quadratic formula. Okay? X equals negative b plus or minus the square root of b squared minus 4ac all over 2a. See you in class.